One of the things that I picked up on when she said about the early migration of Puerto Ricans in the 1920s, a lot of them were sugarcane workers. Ironically, one of the connections between Detroit is that a lot of the rum that was manufactured out of sugarcane was used by United States merchants to sell to the Indian populations in the Midwest to get them to sell their land to the white folks. So it's one of those ironies in history that the rum that is being manufactured by black people and enslaved people is the same rum that is being used to oppress other people in another part of the United States. Now I would like to move over to our good friend, Professor William Santiago Valles. And he has been doing some unique research on the actual vulture funds that are doing this kind of damage that we have been talking about. So I want to turn it over to him.
Thank you. Before I start, I'd like to remind all of you that this is the 50th anniversary of Che Guevara's assassination by Bolivian mercenaries working with the American CIA in 1967. And I'd like to dedicate my remarks to a comrade of ours named Ana Belén Montes, a 60-year-old Puerto Rican political prisoner who's presently caged in Fort Worth, Texas, condemned in 2002 to 30 years for her solidarity work with the one country in the Caribbean, which is our sister, which is Cuba. The point of departure for my remarks is a quote from a book by Lazarato and Jordan titled Governing by Debt. And it's this: the debt is a transaction that submits in order to enslave through economic policies that justify military repression and the suspension of all human rights. And since Chinea gave me 10 minutes, I'm going to read as opposed to just talking so that I can stay within my time limit. I'd like to start by thanking the Wright Museum, the Hush House, the Church of the Messiah, and the local public university for helping to make this event possible. We're all here because this economic military crisis, both in Detroit and in Puerto Rico, is too complicated for any one of us to understand by ourselves, especially the relations between all the parts. The pedagogical strategy for this kind of event, I learned from my teacher, Paulo Freire, who says that you always, I'm quoting for chapter 3 of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, you have to start by identifying who are our enemies, what have they done to us, how they impose the conditions under which we are forced to live, and then to ask what I hope is the most important question for the discussion this evening, is what are we going to do now to disorganize the economic, military, cultural, and media regime controlled by our enemies. Getting angry or whining is no substitute for explaining the causes and the consequences with research-based evidence, and that's what I propose we demand of each other here tonight. If context is what gives meaning to what we say, we are in a global web of domestic colonialism, permanent war, racialized and gendered capitalist exploitation, a monolithic world system without human rights, and if you need examples, I can give those during the discussion. Presidential worldwide assassination complex created by this constitutional law professor from Chicago who was your last president, and as well as genocide through austerity measures both here in Detroit and in several of the other colonies of the United States that are offshore. These austerity measures force displacement, and they also produce the accumulation of profit by stealing, as has been pointed out before. And since knowledge is the main currency in this context, we need to identify both the causal relations and who profits from all of the above during every conversation, as well as provide the evidence informing the direct actions that will verify our findings. I'd like to stop here to define 3 terms. Since the unit of analysis is the single world economy, we can't talk about one country or one city. This is an integrated global market, so one of its main features is monopolies, which under capitalism are a cause, not a consequence. Monopolies are a cause requiring the global control of the natural resources, the industrial technologies, investment capital, that's the financial sector that we have addressed here tonight before, controlling the war machinery, commercial media, and the knowledge production in the academic plantations where some of us earn our pay. One of the consequences, as opposed to the causes, is that of a global population in 2017 of 7.6 trillion people, 2.7 billion of them still live on less than $2.50 a day. I will also mention several times tonight the term vulture funds when referring to the investment banks who specialize in buying risky public debt below its face value in order to demand its payment when the loan is due at its full price. The other term I will refer to repeatedly is colony, both domestic and offshore, which requires understanding that the United States is not a democratic republic or any such myth. It operates as an empire, both inside the United States in the ghettos, the barrios, the reservations where the First Nations have been cornered, and in the trailer parks as well as offshore. The United States has several direct colonies, the Marianas, the Virgin Islands, Palestine, Puerto Rico, and several others which are unofficial colonies like the Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Canada. Following the pedagogical strategy outlined before, my part here is to identify the causes and the consequences of the bankruptcies, both in the domestic, Detroit, and offshore colonies, Puerto Rico. B, identify who profits from the austerity measures and the privatization processes imposed not only on the water facilities here in Detroit, but on the public services, and what we can do now in order to democratize the economic pain. What I'm referring to here is the last speech that Martin Luther King gave in April 1968. Most of you have heard that poetic part about seeing the mountaintop. But Dr. King in that speech also talks about democratizing the economic pain, and that's what I'm going to propose tonight, as well as making sure that the feeder crosses to the other side of the railroad tracks. But I'll talk about that during the question and answer period if you're curious as to what I mean by that. So, such that they're afraid of us and us instead of us being afraid of them. Since the U.S. defeat in Vietnam in 1975, the core of profit making in a capitalist world empire has moved from mining, agriculture, and industry to the credit and debt system that neutralizes local government, that makes electoral processes here in the United States, in Puerto Rico, in Mexico, in Canada irrelevant, that also neutralizes labor unions and social movements. Profit now depends on privatizing public institutions, reducing salaries, whether it's wages, social services, or the pensions, as was mentioned earlier tonight, reselling paid-for private properties over and over again. That's what the foreclosure scheme is about. You get people to pay their mortgage for 10 years, then you foreclose the house, sell it again, foreclose, sell it again. It's another version of hooking people on crack and then selling them garbage for the next 20 years. Excuse me. And fabricating the illusion of future consumptions. If any of you take a look at the 2013 report out of Oxford University, the future of employment in the next 10 years, half of the jobs that exist now are going to disappear. So if any of you think that you're going to college in order to get a job, forget it. If any of you think that you're going to be able to be a consumer like your parents, forget that too. The only thing that publicity leaves to the people who are anywhere between 18 and 35 is to dream about consuming, which they'll never be able to do. But read the report, don't take my word for it. with the pretext of having to pay the public debt. Austerity measures proposed by unelected colonial administrators, called emergency managers here in Detroit, called the Fiscal Control Board in Puerto Rico, are the same measures proposed elsewhere by the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and especially most recently the European Central Bank to Greece, Portugal, Ireland, and Spain. Such measures are designed to re-enslave and recolonize in order to create depressions that look like the consequences of civil war. And I'm quoting from a letter by a Columbia University professor named Joseph Stiglitz in letters to the editor of the New York Times in February 2017. Please listen carefully in case any of what follows sounds familiar. What about those austerity measures? Increasing the retail tax, delaying the retirement age, eliminating the subsidy, especially to smaller pensions, increasing property taxes on homeowners. Does anything sound familiar here? Abolishing the moratorium on foreclosures and evictions. When your parents and grandparents were alive, people were given some kind of advance warning, you know, we're gonna shut you down, we're gonna put your belongings on the street. Now, none of that happens now. Now the police show up and they kick you out. Facilitating job dismissals, restricting union negotiations, eliminating price controls to reduce the value of wages, privatizing cultural institutions and social services. What do I mean by this? Water, electricity, housing, schooling, transportation, healthcare, pensions, reducing government employees, eliminating environmental laws and job safety inspections. In addition, the decisions of all elected boards, whether it's the Board of Education, the Board of Zoning, the school board, or the city council, they all have to be approved by the unelected overseers. In Michigan, most of them are alumni of Western Michigan University, so if you're thinking of sending your children there, don't. These overseers are only accountable to the owners of the public debt. These austerity measures do not explain how the public debt is structured, and so I'm going to do that and then give you the list of the banks, the investment banks that are both vulture funds in Puerto Rico and here in Detroit. There's a system called CAB, which multiplies the public debt because the unpaid interest is added every year to the principal owed, so that the debt multiplies geometrically every year, and the debtors are never able to finish paying the debt. The countries in Africa where I work every summer have paid their debt 4 times over, and they're still under the gun of the IMF and the World Bank. And that's going to happen here, and it's already happened in Puerto Rico. Since my traffic cop gave me a 2-minute notice, I'm going to skip the examples, and I'm also going to skip the questions that I think researchers here should look into, much like the research group that I work with is doing. I neglected to say at the outset that this research project was commissioned by the Puerto Rican Agenda in Chicago 2 years ago, where I have political responsibilities. So if you will please take out your notebooks, your paper and pencils, I'll be happy to give you the names of the vulture funds, the owners, the addresses of their offices. That's important in order to pick it or to identify where they live, so you can go and identify them as financial colonialists or economic war criminals, what political parties they invest in, and what other services and merchandise they invest in, so that we can organize, like the Palestinians, like the South Africans, like the Chileans, like the Irish, a boycott of every merchandise and every service that these fine people produce. You ready? Yes. The first, Monarch Alternative Capital. It's owned by Michael Weinstock and Andrew Herenstein, and by Chris Santana. There's always an Uncle Tom everywhere. I understand that here in the mayor's office, there's often been an Uncle Tom. But this is not my country, that's your mess.
I'll say it then.
Second, what parties does this vulture fund bribe? They finance Marco Rubio's campaign, who was opposed to the protection of the bankruptcy. They also finance Ted Cruz's campaign, and they contribute to any candidate who is opposed to the federal minimum wage and who supports the abolition of taxes. These people invest in the debt of Greece, Argentina, Detroit, Spain, Portugal, and Puerto Rico, and these people own the Texas Rangers. They also own a corporation that produces stainless steel silverware called Oneida Limited, and they own the Hostess brand that produces Twinkies. So none of you can eat Twinkies for the rest of your life. It's garbage that's gonna kill you anyway. So there's no sacrifice, and they invest in the Arch Coal Company. Second vulture fund that is parked both in Puerto Rico and in Detroit, Golden Tree Asset. They're at 300 Park Avenue in New York City, and the owner is named Steve Shapiro. They plan to invest in the liquidation of General Motors, which is, I suppose, something that might interest people here in Detroit. The third vulture fund is named Aurelius Capital, A-U-R-E-L-I-U-S. They're at 535 Madison Avenue in New York City, and the owners are Mark Brodsky and Samuel Rubin, and they finance one of Michigan's finest named Mitt Romney. And they invest in shutting down the newspapers in Chicago. They also got their startup capital from pension funds. You need to find out what pension funds finance Aurelius. And they also demanded of the government of they sued the government of Argentina for $500 million, and they got it. And they have taken the Cooperative Bank of Great Britain to court, and they have seized control of that bank. All of this information is available in the website of In These Times, which is a socialist journal produced in Chicago. I have 4 more to go. The next vulture fund is Blue Mountain Capital, and they're the partners of another vulture fund called Alliance Partners. That is, the second Alliance Partners is owned by Lee Sachs, who worked for Obama in the Treasury Department, and that has Larry Summers, who's an economic advisor to Obama as well, in its board. And the first one that I mentioned, Blue Mountain, is owned by Andrew Feldstein and James Stacy. And these folks finance Hillary Clinton, and they also have bribed Governor Cuomo, who supports the vulture funds in New York, and they support the privatization of public schools through a think tank called The Third Way that is connected with Wall Street. And they control a great deal of the debt here in Detroit and in Puerto Rico as well. I have 3 more to go, Chinea. One is Double Line Capital by it's owned by Jeffrey Gundlach, and they control the retirement pensions in Puerto Rico, and they also control municipal debt. One of the reasons why Puerto Rican debt is so attractive, because it doesn't pay federal tax, it doesn't pay state tax, and it doesn't pay municipal tax. It's got triple exemption. So it's like an ATM machine for the Yankees. That's said in love. The next one is Canyon Capital, and that's owned by Mitchell Julius and Joshua Friedman. and they invest in the debt of Greece, Argentina, Detroit, and Puerto Rico. And they have partnered with Andrew Agassi. Those of you who are tennis groupies might know who that turkey is, in something called Charter School Ventures since 2012 in order to sabotage the public schooling system in this country. Notice that I didn't say education. The last one is Brigade Capital Management, and that belongs to Donald Morgan, and they own the debt of Detroit and the debt of Puerto Rico, and their startup capital and their ongoing capital is the pension funds of New York City, the state of New York, the state of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Maryland. So if you know anybody in those states, in order to organize a boycott campaign with muscle, you have to get to the labor unions in these states to get them to take their pension funds out of Brigade Capital. I'm finished now.
Thank you very much. There you have it. You have an X-ray, a portrait, a picture of what's happening at the ground level across, two different places in the United States mainland or the empire, using the words that have been used here, and in the colonies, both the internal colonies of Detroit and the external colony of Puerto Rico. We have two mics conveniently located on each side of the aisle. We would invite you for your comments. If anyone would like to come up, feel free to do so. We welcome every question, every comment, every expression of support. So, anyone, please jump in there. We are here for you.
I'd just like to thank the panel and the moderator and this whole concept of combining our communities together. I think it's very important. And I'd like to suggest that those who are organizing that we reconvene for other programs around this topic with a breakout session so that we can actually have some action following these type of particular presentations. Very kind of undergird the fact that we have some independent thinking, some critical analysis, but we need informed activism. So I welcome any ideas so we can continue this type of program here at Charles Wright. Thank you.
Okay, we got a question coming up?
My name is Bill Myers, just because I don't like to see an empty mic, and I really appreciate what you're doing tonight, and that you're all here and talking about the empire, which you don't hear very often, and colonialism. My question would probably be to the academics here who work in institutions that belong to the state, usually. How can you really feel any sense of liberation or revolution if you work within a structure like that? And how can you express yourself in an academic world?
Well, let's start with William.
In August of this year, I traveled with my wife to St. Kitts. There's an African American named Randall Robinson who used to be the director of Trans-Africa, who is exiled there. He left this country because it's a sinking ship, in case you haven't noticed. And my wife and I met with him because he and Ethel, is that his wife's name? Hazel, excuse me. Helped to organize the boycott of apartheid South Africa, and we needed their help in order to organize this national boycott. And one of the things that happened after I went with my wife to St. Kitts is that I went to the University of Puerto Rico, where I was asked to present this research, and also at the Bar Association, which is one of the few autonomous institutions in the colonial regime. And one of the things that the professors there at the University of Puerto Rico said is that first, I could get arrested for terrorism for saying the same thing that I said here tonight there. And I said it anyway. And the other thing that they said is that nobody talks like that there at the university anymore. The reason why some of us do this kind of work is because none of us, not Jorge, not Ali, not me, and not some of my comrades over here appropriately on the left side of the room, none of us would be in a university in the first place had it not been for the urban insurrections that took place in this country in the 1960s, and for the demands of African Americans and Latinos and Asians and indigenous people and Arabs on those campuses, that some of us be brought to the campuses. Some of us are exiles, some of us are immigrants, some of us are refugees, but our allegiance, like Walter Rodney, who was my teacher in Tanzania, said, our allegiance is not to the university administrators. As I mentioned before, the academy is a plantation, and we're its hired slaves. And we accept the conditions under which we're forced to work there, but that's not who we are committed to. That's not who we are accountable to. We're accountable to the social movements in the streets and in the labor halls and in the mountains of our country, or here, as Jimmy Bike said, in the slums of Detroit are the mountains of the working people here. That's who we're accountable to.
Thank you very much. Let me take another question because they close at 7:30. I've been reminded that the hall here closes at 7:30. Go ahead. No, well, maybe her first and then Ali, because he wants you to speak. He wants you to speak. He wants to get the student.
Thank you, Professor. First of all, my name is Esmima Gutierrez. I'm a student at the Center for Latino and Latin American Studies. So, Dr. George Chinea and Annie's are really close to my heart. And it's just a comment because I might just sleep because my mom is like calling. She wants me to go to dinner. My Mexican mom wants to eat without me. But I really want to appreciate you all coming here and having the time in your own lives to come and speak to us. And you all have enlightened me so much. Every single one of you. I never knew anything about Corktown. From Chicago, I didn't know any of this, and I was telling my friend, I was like, I wish my tios and my abuelos were as woke as you guys. Like, I was like, geez, like, why can't I have these conversations with my family? Anytime I talk about politics, you're like throwing me outside. Like, I don't, but I really do appreciate, and I hope that we can, I love to see people, but I hope to see youth coming up and creating these panels and things like that. So I really appreciate everyone coming out, and yeah, thank you so much. Oh, and thank you for mentioning about Che Guevara and Paz Descanse. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jasmine.
I would like to thank everybody on the panel. I had the pleasure of reaching out to folks. I just want to give you a heads up. I'll be in touch for ongoing planning and activity. Charles has given me my marching orders. I really enjoyed the presentation. 2 quick questions. Monica, could you elaborate a little bit more on what We the People of Detroit does, what it is, how it works? And the other question for the panel is, what is the current state of the independence movement in Puerto Rico? And I asked that as a supporter of Puerto Rican independence, and I asked a Puerto Rican friend of mine what's going on, and I was shocked, I was hurt when she said, I kind of hope Puerto Rico becomes the state of the United States because the situation is so bad, so bleak. And I was just surprised to hear that from her, political progressive, and so I'm a little shook by that. So thank you so much again.
Thank you.
We didn't start out that way. We started out as 5 women working along with other activists in the city to fight against mayoral control. And we always have to remind people that we won on that one. And so out of that struggle and continuing to struggle against the charter, which we knew was going to gut the power structure of the city, we fought that issue. We also organized around emergency management. But in 2013, going into 14, when Charity Hicks was arrested for just alerting her neighbors and friends that they were under threat of losing access to water, our whole organization restructured itself, and we began to really concentrate heavily around water relief. So we provide water relief. We run the City of Detroit's Emergency Water Rights Hotline, where people can call if they need assistance navigating all of the small pots of money that's still left in the city. We also deliver water if people are elderly or if they have children or transportation issues. We do what's called water drops. We also have a youth program called Youth Leadership Now, where we are stipending young people to become woke, as they say. They are actually paired with a social justice mentor. They go through a very intensive social justice training so that they can organize and mobilize themselves. That's that self-determination that we talk about. And then the last part is we have what's called We the People of Detroit Community Research Collective. And Mama Neb is here. She's one of our senior advisors in terms of our research collective, and we're getting ready, hopefully in February, to release our second publication mapping the educational crisis in Detroit. And what we've decided is we're not waiting on anybody to call us to the forefront. We've deputized ourselves. It's out of that cooperative work and self-determination that we're standing on that shoulders, those shoulders that we continue to do our work. And hopefully now what we've done is we've linked that work with the work that's going on in Puerto Rico.
Thank you so much. Let me say something about Ali's question. You know, one of the first books I read when I went to college was Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth. I read that book in Spanish, actually, and it was almost like my Bible. I used to walk around campus showing people, did you know, did you know, did you know? But one of the things that he does mention is that, and Gil Scott-Heron said it in song, when he talked about emancipating yourself from mental slavery, that is that colonialism affects people in the pocketbook, right? The resources, the way they are distributed, the way they are structured, the way they are exploited. But it also affects people at the psychological level, and Puerto Rico has been under U.S. control for 120 years. And so it's hard for people to sort of separate yourself from that reality. So what's happening in Puerto Rico, in my opinion, my humble opinion, and I think this was mentioned here earlier, is that people have developed a culture of resistance that is not an electoral culture of resistance, where people don't go to vote, particularly in order to show their displeasure or their rejection of the colonial status quo. They do it on an everyday basis in their music, in their ways of living, in their associational life, in the choices that they make to support this cause or that other cause. And you see that on an everyday basis, but it doesn't come across as an organized movement, you know, to go to the elections and vote. But anyway, somebody else may have a comment on that. I know Santiago has spoken before. Anyone else before we go to Santiago? All right, Santiago.
I will answer this question as somebody who was formerly in the diplomatic corps of the Socialist Party of Puerto Rico, both in Central America and in Africa.
You're speaking for the mic, please.
I said that I'm going to answer the question that Ali asked as someone who was formerly in the diplomatic service of the Socialist Party of Puerto Rico, both in Africa and in Central America. I learned while I was an undergraduate student in this country that an optimist is a person who is ill-informed. And I don't have any illusions about our country achieving its independence through the electoral process. That's not the way Angola achieved its independence from Portugal. That's not the way Algeria achieved its independence from France. And that sure as hell is not the way Vietnam achieved its independence from the United States and from France and from China and from Japan. Independence without the decision-making process being dominated by the working classes is as phony as the independence of Mexico or the independence of Brazil or the independence of Colombia. The workers have to run the decision-making at every step of the way. In the Caribbean, that means majority black rule, whether it's in Jamaica or in Cuba or in the Dominican Republic or in Puerto Rico. That's where race and class and gender intersect. The last thing I'd like to say is this. In Rastafari, there is a concept that we have called dread, and it's imagining a world without slave masters, imagining a world without plantation owners, imagining a world without capitalists, and imagining a world without the American empire. And like Chinea said, unfortunately, given the way colonialism has a monopoly control of all the media, of all the schooling system, of all the imagery, and even of the religious institutions, it's difficult for people, not just in the not just in Puerto Rico, but also right here in Detroit, to imagine a world without the American empire supplying them with their basic needs. If we start, as people here in Detroit have started to look after the control of their water, to look after the control of their food, we can begin that process prior to organizing the kind of boycott I referred to earlier. In Vietnam, as in Eritrea, in Eastern Africa, as in the Western Sahara, people made sure that they had a set of institutions that were parallel to the colonial administration, as we have in Humboldt Park, and as we have in several cities across the United States, so that we have a counter power. And we have 6 million of us in the United States, and we come in all shades of brown. When we come to hit the United States government, they're not gonna know who's coming to poison their water.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the entire panel for these service activities that got organized on a short-term basis. I want to ask Charles Farrell to come here and do the closing remarks. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I just want to make a donation. We have a number of flyers outside regarding some important programs. We do evaluate our programs here through this evaluation form. If you could please complete it. Most importantly, if you could add some comments to the bottom in terms of ideas you have for future programming and to rank the speakers. There was a very important self-determination decision that was made in consultation with the Council of Elders, including Dr. Gloria House and Frank Joyce, where the Charles H. Wright Museum every Saturday from 10 a.m. to 12:30 has a Freedom School here. It's very unique in terms of the instruction of the Detroit Public Schools that we have former professors and actually activists teaching our children beyond the core curriculum. We've embraced a garden for the children on the grounds of the museum. So there's a garden that will be continue to evolve. So I'd like to thank Dr. House for her leadership on multiple fronts. Today we had this entire theater filled with students from Detroit Public Schools that we partnered with. We have free busing going out to the schools. We'll be going out to Southwest Detroit as well. Today was Wendell Harrison, a jazz set in terms of exploring jazz and its African roots. Wendell's going to come back on Friday for a free concert here. We had a great Thelonious Monk concert recently, so we're trying to embrace the music and bring that in and tie that into politics. We have also on November 11th, Saturday, we do a lot of programs here at the Charles Wright. Hashtag Water and Justice, a poet, Nzinga Lejeune, with a spoken word artist, Nolaj, N-O-L-A-J, and a book signing and a Q&A. Please mark your calendars. She's really talking about a lot of the issues in Flint and water, hashtag Water and Justice. Again, Saturday the 11th. Now, to talk about the 11th being a powerful day around music, we're going to come back that evening with a concert on the great Sun Ra. Sun Ra Cosmic Music Community Concert Series, Astro Black, a tribute to Sun Ra and his Solar Orchestra. You have to be here for that. Very important. I'm not going to continue with programming, except that we're doing a play, I should say, for Lorraine Hansberry on Wednesday, November 15th. It's a paid event, as well as Sun Ra is a paid event. Lorraine Hansberry, To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. This is the second year the museum will be doing a Black Friday marketplace out of Cooperative Economics in Action. This is November 24th. We'll have vendors here on the first floor as well as the lower floor. We'll have a film called Black Friday by Rick Mathis. Booker T. Coleman will be here, Eleanor Children Dance Troupe, and good music. So it should be a very festive way that we could spend our money in our own community. I think just a summary, if you could go to our website to look at our events. If you're not a member, join your institution. $15 for senior citizens, $35 for general membership. There's a student price. Applications are at the door. Let's continue this type of panel. And again, on behalf of the museum, our board, our president, Juanita Moore, we thank you for coming out, sharing your evening with us. And we want to reconvene this type of program. So thank everyone, thank you. And again, thank Dr. Ali Johnson, our Adele, and our moderator, and our panel. Can we give them a final round of applause, please? Posters are at the door, evaluation forms and membership forms. Thank you again.